Pricing is a strategic tool that is fast evolving with constantly changing business models across various segments of our prospects and customers. In fact, we've seen HRTech platforms adapting in 2020 to new business scenarios in their attempt to acquire and retain customers. So how do we see pricing trends evolving in 2021 and beyond for HRTech platforms? To discuss this, I have with me today Howard Flint, Managing Director and Founder, HG Solutions, a specialist consultancy based in the UK, focused on providing advice and expertise to HR technology and services providers. Howard, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you very much. Good to talk to you, Thomas.
Absolutely, Howard. So, Howard, I want to first talk about a fundamental shift in pricing strategy in 2020 due to the pandemic. In fact, I was reading a research report recently that highlighted how a majority of SaaS companies have adopted a product-led growth approach to manage the impact of the pandemic on purchasing decisions. For instance, HubSpot reduced price of its starter growth suite by over 50% and saw a major increase in new customers, not only signing, but also upgrading. Likewise, I know of an HCM player who took a strategic view with a relatively lower fixed price for startups up to about 50 employees, with the expectation that these startups will grow quite rapidly in the post-pandemic era. So Howard, how do you see the impact of the pandemic in 2020 playing out on HR tech pricing models in 2021 and beyond?
So it's a good question. It's a good observations, I think, of what's happened over the last year. And I think the first thing to think about is it, it has been a tricky market for some HR tech platforms, and they have had to really look at what they do about pricing. But I think we could probably divide it into two parts or two sections. One is those that are selling into the small and medium-sized enterprises, the sort of rather the higher volume transactional sales, and those that are continuing to sell the higher value software into the enterprises. And I think you're right. I think in terms of getting traction, in terms of following the sort of the classic land and expand strategy, we can see a lot of organizations trying to just at least get some kind of a footprint in there with their target market by going in with a lower price. Now, I think that's got some, that might have some advantages. It might mean that people are prepared to commit rather more easily. But obviously it's got some risks because it's not free for the HR tech vendor to provide it. So how are they going to recoup the money then that they're losing by lowering their price? And the only way they're going to do that is through volume. So they really have to think very carefully about whether the extra volume they get from more sales is going to be outweighed by when they lower the price. On the enterprise side, actually, I think this is all about really understanding whether the needs of your enterprise clients are satisfied by your platform, the value that it's bringing. And I personally, I mean, Thomas, you might have seen otherwise, at that level, at that end of the spectrum, I haven't seen very much price sensitivity, but certainly at the lower end, this has been an interesting strategy, I think. Yeah.
So I think, just as an additional observation, I was, listening to an interview of Brian Halligan, who's the CEO of HubSpot, and he makes some very interesting points. And he says that it is harder to build a competitive advantage on the product side today because technology is all pervasive. So, people can really catch up really quickly. And interestingly, freemium, accounts for 60% of HubSpot's revenues, even at their current size, which is, $1 billion, dollar ARR. And the other interesting observation he makes is that they're continuing to provide more products and more value at the same price point, as customers are simply expecting more over time from the same platform. That's really interesting. Now, having said that, I thought let's just move on to the next point, which is, looking at linking pricing metrics used by a platform provider with the value metrics being perceived by the customer. And let's take a look at learning management systems as an example. So for instance, the pricing metric used by LMS providers is typically per employee per month. Now, the value metric perceived by the customer at the very least, would be learning content consumed per employee per month. And even if we keep this discussion at a very basic level, which is only consumption led scenario, we are looking at some very interesting approaches to pricing, that may actually, be very, very strategic. So, Howard, what is your take on consumption or usage-based pricing?
Well, I think that it's a tricky one, especially for smaller vendors, because that it's very, very difficult then for them to build and understand what their long-term revenue might be with clients. The classic way of pricing for a SaaS platform is really based on the capability and capacity that they're offering to a user. So not the amount that the user is actually using the platform, but the amount that the user has available to them. And in a way, it's up to the user, it's up to the buyer of that technology to use that and get value out of that subscription. I think for a tech vendor, when I'm starting to go to usage or transactional based pricing, you're then starting to get to the point where your demand, the demand clearly is variable within the organization, and therefore the income you're getting is variable. So we have to understand there's a sort of commercial imperative as a SaaS provider that you have to think about. I mean, ideally, you give your platform away to everybody for free. And if you're a HubSpot, as you were talking about, they can afford to do that. And they're in a market where they are focusing on effectively the legacy end of the product adoption spectrum. But if I'm a young startup HR technology platform, I want to be trying to get value from the platform, from the people who are using it in a stable way that allows me to reinvest into that technology and get that product leadership that you were relating to with the HubSpot.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. Just to add on, I think also the future is all about customer experience. It's the customer experience which makes products truly sticky, and therefore usage is a very important thing. And if you really looked at it in the pre-pandemic area, LMS consumption was on an average about 10%, and during the lockdown and so on, consumption really shot up. But that's something for vendors to actually sort of think about.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think vendors absolutely have to focus on driving client adoption of their software.
Yes, absolutely.
That's a massive issue. But whether or not they need to directly link client adoption to their pricing models. I mean, if you look at the likes of HubSpot or Workday or the big players, I mean, no, you buy a license, and the idea is then that your users will use that. Now, the good vendors will wrap their arms around their clients and will try and get their clients' users to use the platform as much as possible, and they need to do that. Otherwise, they're not going to renew. But pricing in that way, that's a different. I think that's a different story. LMS possibly one of the areas where you could possibly do that. Some of the others, I think, a bit more tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. So, taking this further, let's now discuss. One of my favorite topics and something we've discussed before, which is outcome-based pricing models, and taking the same LMS example, we could say that the value metric perceived by the customer is actually linking learning to engagement and performance. Or if you look at the talent acquisition space, it could perhaps be linked to hiring as opposed to just CVs passing, video interviews, and so on and so forth. Because what it does is it actually shifts the onus on platforms to deliver a very tangible outcome as just opposed to an operational process. And I think stickiness of application happens when you are able to align with business outcomes that your customer is actually looking for. So perhaps the model could have two components. There could be a basic pricing component, which is linked to the platform per se, the implementation, integrations, process optimization, and what have you. And a premium pricing perhaps linked to, and that's an added price linked to some kind of an agreed outcome. Because at the end of the day, there have to be some metrics that I guess platforms have to sign up to. It should be either cost reduction, efficiency in processes, a learning index, engagement index, or what have you, because the market is so competitive, right? I mean, when I was in Vegas in 2019 at the HRTech conference, there were over 100 players in the talent acquisition space alone, and most of them out of the US, right? So really, Howard, how are you seeing HR tech vendors looking at this concept?
I mean, success-based pricing is very seductive for an HR tech vendor because in their mind, it's going to make it easier for clients to buy their platform because they're guaranteeing performance, that the vendor is guaranteeing performance of the buyer. And actually, if that's performed well, that could potentially allow them to charge a higher price, so more business, higher price. But the issue about folding in success-based metrics into your pricing model is it then starts making you accountable for success. You are then going to build your delivery business around driving success. And quite often what I see is organizations that actually step away from being a technology platform and start to almost to be a process management platform. If we take recruitment as an example, there are plenty of examples of recruitment platforms that have almost grown into being virtual recruitment agencies, tech-enabled recruitment agencies. Now, that's not what they're not designed to do that. That's not the type of business that they are. They are a recruitment SaaS platform there to provide capacity and capability to the client, not necessarily to provide recruitment results. And one of the big reasons for that, of course, is not in their power to do that. The client still has a lot of responsibility and accountability for that success. So, the clients, the organizations I advise, this is always a very, very important discussion to have, is mapping the pricing model to the accountability that they want to have. And as soon as you start getting into success-based pricing models, you're building an accountability into your operation. It might mean you have to build a team to deliver it, not just the software.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a very important, very interesting model. I've not seen many examples of where it's been particularly successful.
Yeah. So I interestingly, I sort of work with a fintech company out of South Africa by the name of FinChatbot. And their USP, because chatbots are available dime a dozen. So the USP that they actually bring to the table is that, look, we focus on financial services, that's insurance, banks, and so on, and we work with you, on a continuous basis to optimize those conversations that the bot would have with our clients, and we charge you a certain fee for integrations and implementation and so on and so forth. But we also charge you a higher fee, a percentage of lead conversion into customers, of renewal of insurance policies, collections, and so on and so forth. Because what they're seeing is that going with a standard offering, there are hundreds of players in that space. So differentiation is sort of becoming a challenge. So I'm seeing a lot of that in fintech and a couple of other areas. And perhaps there could be some components of HR tech where people could really look at can start giving it some thought. And it could be even around, okay, if I'm an engagement platform, then is the engagement index actually moving? If I'm a learning, and you really have to define that. If it's a learning platform, is that a learning index which is improving? So I guess some kind of a metric which is easy for the platform to also execute, not something which is totally out of their control.
I think that's the challenge, is finding the success metric that is within their control and can be managed and executed properly through the platform without having to add on a service component. Now, having said that, there's nothing wrong with adding on a premium product stroke service hybrid away from a basic edition. I think it's just the providing the HR tech vendor understanding that that's what they're going to have to do as part of that, and that what they've got then is not pure SaaS. It's service enabled, it's people enabled SaaS actually,
right.
which is fine as a proposition, but it's just understanding what that means in terms of the way that it needs to be delivered, the cost associated with that, and then doing the cost benefit analysis of a higher price versus the higher cost of delivery that will take.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. So finally, Howard, one of the big challenges we see is the inability of organizations to fully use the data and analytics that they get from various HRTech platforms. So I can see a major opportunity here now for vendors to move into a managed platform model, in a way linked to what we spoke a little earlier, where there is a consulting service which is weaved around the product, and it doesn't necessarily have to be done by the platform themselves. It could be systems integrators, it could be the consulting firms, it could be their partners who are actually providing the service. Because in any case, if you look at the ERPs and the CRMs of the world, there is a consulting piece which is really coming around, around a SaaS product as well. That way processes can be constantly optimized, action plans defined, follow-up actions, put in place. And certainly, it can improve, the value of your proposition, make it a lot more sticky, and obviously improve, price margins. So really, a consultancy offering, not necessarily offered by, the company themselves, but ensuring that they have an ecosystem of partners who have that ability. So, so do you think this can be a game changer in a market where, most HR tech platforms are really focused on just building what I call a better mousetrap?
I think this is not just a game changer. I think it's a hygiene factor for successful HR technology companies, and certainly the platforms I work with. One of the critical parts of the capability that they can offer is this consulting wrapper or a partner, as you say. It's not just about whether or not somebody can use the platform that you're providing, it's how they use the platform that you're providing. Customer success teams generally operate at the transactional level. Has somebody logged in? Have they done the training? Do they know how to do the basic transactions? Whereas customer success teams really should be showing organizations how to use it properly, how to make sure that people are using it as much as possible, and to make sure they're getting the outcomes out of it. And when we talk about we talked about transaction-based pricing and success-based pricing, this links into that. If you've got that consulting wrapper, whether or not you're providing it or your partners are providing that on behalf of your clients, that is a massive value add. I've worked with a lot of analytics platforms, and the best analytics platforms are very, very easy to use. Very powerful, but very, very easy to use. Now, the problem with them being easy to use is that people think they're not worth anything. It's easy to use. It's not worth anything.
Right.
But it's not just getting the data out. It's what you do with the data.
Absolutely.
That's important. So if I'm in something like analytics, this consulting wrapper is fundamental, and I think can make the difference between having a successful analytics platform business and it not being successful. But you're right, if we can get the consulting wrapper there it's definitely fantastic. It's a fantastic way of leveraging the value of the platform up in the eyes of the buyer, and therefore the price that you can charge. Definitely.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Howard, for a really engaging discussion. And I think we had some very interesting points that actually came out, and hopefully we have stimulated the thought process of our viewers. When they start looking at HR tech pricing models for 2021 and beyond.
Right, pricing is a great subject.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So until next time, it is goodbye from us at HRTech.com.
Thank you very much.